the burning summer of 1187, the Holy Land lay dying beneath the weight of its own sorrow. The wind carried the smell of ash and iron across the scorched plains, and the sun itself seemed to hang lower in the sky, dimmed by the smoke of countless fires. The armies of Christendom had perished on the hills of Hattin, where the knights of Jerusalem met their end beneath the blazing desert sun. The banners of the Crusaders, once radiant with the cross of God, now lay trampled in the dust. Armor rusted beside the bones of the fallen, and vultures circled in the still air. The flower of the Latin kingdom, men who had crossed oceans, men who had believed themselves invincible, was gone. And above their ruin rode Salah ad-Din, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the scourge of the Franks, the lion of Islam. He surveyed the field where thousands of his enemies lay slain, his eyes calm and distant, as if already searching for his next conquest. The victory was his, complete and absolute. The relic of the true cross, the very wood on which Christ had been crucified, was taken as a trophy. The King of Jerusalem himself was in chains. The Holy Land trembled. City after city fell. Nazareth, Caesarea, Jaffa, and Tiberias opened their gates to the conqueror. Acre, that proud jewel of the coast, was taken without mercy. And then, the unthinkable, Jerusalem, the holy city, surrendered. The bells of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre were silenced, and the crescent rose where once the cross had shone. The dream of the Crusades, born in blood, carried across centuries, seemed at last extinguished. But not everywhere. Far to the north, on the edge of the Blue Sea, there stood one city that refused to bow. Tyre. Ancient even before the coming of Christ, Tyre had once defied the armies of Babylon and withstood the wrath of Alexander the Great. Its walls rose from the sea itself, white stone glistening in the sunlight, a fortress born of salt and storm. It had seen empires rise and fall. Now, it would witness one more. After Hattin, the survivors fled there, knights, priests, widows, and broken men. Ships arrived daily, bringing stories of ruin. They came from Acre, from Sidon, from the smoking ruins of the holy city. They carried nothing but despair. Jerusalem has fallen, they whispered. The king is captured. The cross is lost. And yet, within the walls of Tyre, something fierce and wordless began to stir. A defiance, a rage, a refusal to die. Among those who arrived was a man whose name would soon echo across Christendom, Conrad of Montferrat. He was a noble from the north, a man of cunning and iron will. In Constantinople he had seen the courts of emperors. In battle, he had tasted both triumph and betrayal. He came not as a pilgrim, but as a commander, a man who could look upon ruin and see opportunity. When he first set foot on the docks of Tyre, the people saw in his eyes something that no one else possessed anymore: conviction. Conrad walked the ramparts, studying the sea walls, the towers, the narrow streets that wound like veins through the city. He spoke little, but when he finally addressed the council, his words burned through the silence like a blade. "You say the kingdom is lost," he told them. "You say the cross is gone. Then let this city be our kingdom. Let these walls be our cross. If Saladin comes, and he will come, let him find here not despair, but defiance." And the people believed him. For the first time since Hattin, they began to hope. They reforged the broken swords. They built engines of war from the wreckage of ships. Fishermen became soldiers, priests took up bows, and women carried stones to the walls. Every hand in Tyre turned toward the work of survival. The city became a single heartbeat, steady, determined, unyielding. From the towers, the watchers could already see the distant haze of movement, banners rippling like fire under the desert sun. Saladin was coming. Across the plains of Galilee, his legions gathered like a storm. Tens of thousands of men, armored in bronze and black. Cavalry from Egypt, archers from Damascus, siege engineers from Aleppo. The sound of their drums rolled across the land like thunder. Saladin had taken Jerusalem. He had broken the Crusader kings. But Tyre, that small defiant fortress on the sea, remained beyond his grasp, and that, to him, was intolerable. He swore by Allah that Tyre would fall, and that no stone of its proud walls would remain standing. The people of Tyre saw his campfires long before his army reached the coast. At night the horizon glowed red, a forest of torches moving closer, closer, like stars descending to earth. Bells rang through the city. The churches were filled with trembling voices. Children clung to their mothers. Knights tightened their armor straps in silence. Priests raised the cross high above the ramparts, blessing the defenders in the cold dawn light. The sea was calm that morning. The sky was clear. And yet, every man and woman in Tyre felt the same thing, the air before a storm. From the Tower of St. Mark, Conrad of Montferrat looked out across the waters. The wind carried the scent of salt and blood. Far beyond the horizon, he could see the faint shimmer of steel, the coming army. Behind him, the city stirred, a living thing, wounded but unbroken. "Let him come," Conrad murmured, more to himself than to any listener. "Let him come and see what it means to fight a people who have nothing left to lose." That night, the waves beat against the stone like drums. The fires of Saladin's host burned upon the shore. And in the darkness, Tyre, ancient, defiant, eternal, prepared to face the full wrath of the Sultan. The fate of the Holy Land, and of the dream of the cross itself, would now rest upon its walls. And so began the siege of Tyre, the last and greatest stand of the Crusader Kingdom. Dawn broke over the coast of Tyre, and the city woke beneath a crimson sky. The sea glimmered like molten glass, reflecting the first light of day, a light that revealed more than beauty. Far to the south, the horizon moved. 1,000 specks crawled across the land, shimmering with steel and fire. The army of Salah ad-Din had come. At first, it was only the wind that carried their presence, a deep, distant hum, the sound of drums and the low chant of thousands of men marching as one. But by midday, the dust rose like a storm cloud, and from every tower of Tyre, the people could see the truth of their doom approaching. Saladin had brought the might of the east. Columns of cavalry stretched across the plain, Mamluks on swift Arabian horses, the Sultan's personal guard, armored in black and gold. Behind them came archers from Aleppo, slingers from Egypt, the engineers of Damascus dragging their siege towers and mangonels. Ships from the Nile coast sailed along the horizon, carrying wood, stone, and men to choke the harbor. And in their center rode the Sultan himself, calm as a prophet, his eyes fixed on the walls of Tyre as though the city were already his. From the ramparts, Conrad watched. He could see their banners, the green of Islam, the black of jihad, the white of Damascus. The air shimmered with heat and dust. To his side stood the Templars and Hospitallers, grim and silent, their faces hidden beneath steel helms. These were men who had seen Hattin with their own eyes. Some had buried their brothers with their bare hands. None spoke of mercy. "Do you fear him?" asked one of the younger knights, barely 20, his voice trembling. Conrad's gaze never left the horizon. "I do," he said quietly, "but fear is not our enemy. Surrender is." Below, the harbor stirred with life. Genoa sailors tightened ropes, archers lined the walls, and priests carried relics through the streets. The citizens, fishermen, merchants, refugees, stood shoulder to shoulder. They had nowhere else to go. Tyre was not merely a city now. It was the heart of a dying kingdom, and the heart had decided to beat until it broke. By evening, Saladin's army encircled the landward side of the city. The plain turned black with tents and banners. Smoke rose from their cooking fires, drifting over the sea. The sound of their drums rolled like thunder through the night. The defenders watched from the battlements. Some prayed, others cursed. In the palace near the sea, Conrad met with the captains of the city. There were men of every nation, Franks, Italians, Germans, and Syrians who had once served under the Crusader crown. Around the table lay maps, reports, and relics of shattered hope. "They are too many," said a Templar commander, his voice like gravel. "We are 2,000 at most." Conrad nodded. "Then we will make them think we are 20. He traced his finger across the map, marking the gates, the towers, the harbor. "The walls are strong. The sea is ours. Saladin has never taken a city that could not be starved or betrayed. So we will give him neither." He looked around the room, at faces hardened by loss. "He thinks us broken. Let us show him how dangerous broken men can be." The first arrows fell at dawn. They came from the eastern hills, a storm of black feathers slicing through the air, hissing like serpents. Shields clanged. Men shouted. The battle for Tyre had begun. From the camp of the Sultan rose the thunder of drums and horns. Siege engines rolled forward, great towers of wood and iron, taller than the walls themselves, pushed by hundreds of men. Behind them, engineers loaded catapults with stones the size of oxen. The city shook as the first projectile struck. Walls splintered. Roofs caved in. Dust and screams filled the air. But Tyre did not yield. Archers on the walls answered with their own hail of death. Flaming bolts streaked across the sky, setting one of the siege towers ablaze. The defenders roared. Bells rang from every church. and the sound carried over the battlefield like a war hymn. Conrad stood atop the main gate, his sword drawn but unused. He did not fight yet. His weapon was his will. His eyes followed the movements of Saladin's men, his mind calculating every weakness, every hesitation. When the flames reached the first tower and it began to collapse, he spoke softly, almost to himself. Now. Below, the gates opened, and a small band of knights charged out, fewer than 50 men, armored in white and red. The Templars rode straight into the enemy vanguard, smashing through ranks of startled archers. It was madness, but it worked. The Muslims fell back, disordered, and the rest of the siege line hesitated. Before Saladin's captains could regroup, the knights turned and galloped back behind the gates, leaving behind a trail of fire and corpses. The gates slammed shut. The city cheered. Conrad exhaled. "Show them," he said quietly, "that Tyre still breathes." That night, the city burned with torches. Every rooftop glowed. From the sea came the low sound of oars. The Genos fleet had arrived, their sails black against the moon. They brought grain, weapons, and reinforcements, precious gifts that would buy the defenders time. Saladin's scouts saw the ships and reported to their sultan. His expression did not change. He had faced defiance before. He knew that victory was not won in a day. "Let them have their ships," he said. "The sea cannot save them forever." He ordered his engineers to build new machines, trebuchets larger than any the Franks had ever seen. He sent his admirals to block the harbour. The siege would not be swift. He would grind Tyre to dust, no matter how long it took. Days turned to weeks. The land around the city became a graveyard of tents and broken wood. The air stank of smoke and death. The constant rhythm of catapults was like the heartbeat of war, steady, endless, merciless. Inside Tyre, food grew scarce. The markets were silent. Horses were slaughtered. Wells ran low. And yet the people endured. Every morning, Conrad walked the walls. He spoke to the soldiers by name, praised the wounded, shared his bread with the starving. His presence alone was a shield, not of stone, but of spirit. The knights who had once seen him as an outsider now followed him as their lord. Still, the pressure grew. Saladin's army tightened the noose. His ships cut off the sea lanes. His catapults never stopped. At night, flaming stones crashed into the city, setting houses ablaze. By dawn, the people extinguished them, rebuilt, and prepared for the next assault. The siege of Tyre was no longer a battle. It was a test of will. One night, a storm rose from the sea. Winds howled. Waves slammed against the harbour walls. Ships broke from their moorings and crashed against the rocks. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos below. Tents torn apart, men shouting in the dark, fire and water mixing as though the heavens themselves had chosen sides. From his camp, Saladin watched the tempest. To his eyes, it was an omen. "God fights with the sea," he murmured, "but we fight with patience." Yet the storm favoured the defenders. The waves scattered the Sultan's blockade. Several of his ships were wrecked, their remains washing ashore the next morning. The people of Tyre took it as a sign, divine proof that the sea itself guarded them. The next day, Conrad ordered a counterattack by sea. Genos galleys swept out from the harbour, ramming the surviving enemy ships and setting them ablaze. The sky filled with smoke. Flames danced on the waves like spirits of vengeance. The defenders shouted from the walls, and their voices carried across the water, "Tyre! Tyre! Tyre!" It was more than a cheer. It was a declaration that the city still lived. From his tent, Saladin could hear the cries. For the first time in months, his calm cracked. His captain saw it, a tightening of the jaw, a shadow across his face. "Withdraw the ships," he ordered at last. "The sea belongs to them, but the land is ours. We will starve them." He knew then that Tyre would not fall easily. He knew, too, that every day the city held out, the West would have time to breathe, to rally, to return. The Sultan stood at the edge of his camp and looked toward the glowing city on the water. The wind carried the distant sound of bells, the heartbeat of a stubborn people. "Let them have their walls," he whispered. "They will become their tomb." Inside those same walls, Conrad stood upon the ramparts, watching the fires of Saladin's camp burn like a second horizon. His armor was dented, his cloak torn, but his eyes were bright, alive with a kind of fury that no defeat could quench. He thought of Hattin, of the brothers he had lost, of the cross stolen, of Jerusalem fallen. He thought of the vow he had made when he first came to this city of exiles. Tyre shall not fall. Now, standing above a city battered but unbroken, he felt the truth of those words more deeply than ever. He turned to the men beside him, a handful of knights, their faces pale with exhaustion, their armor black with soot. "Look there," he said, pointing to the vast army below. "Do you see them? They think us trapped. They think this city is dying. But they forget that faith cannot starve. Hope does not surrender." He looked out once more over the dark sea, over the endless fires of the enemy. "Let Saladin come with all his might," he said quietly. "We will meet him with all our hearts." The wind rose again, carrying with it the echo of his words, across the ramparts, across the water, into the night. The siege had only begun. But the legend of Tyre was already being written, in fire, in blood, and in the unbroken will of those who refused to kneel. The sun rose over Tyre like a blade cutting through the horizon, painting the sea in streaks of gold and crimson. The city's walls, ancient and unyielding, gleamed with the heat of early morning, and yet, beneath their shining stones, tension gripped every heart. The storm of Saladin's army pressed ever closer, a tide of steel and horseflesh that sought to drown the last refuge of the Crusader dream. For weeks, the city had endured the Sultan's assaults. Catapults hurled boulders that could crush men like insects. Arrows fell like hail, and the cries of the wounded became as constant as the crashing of waves against the harbour walls. Tyre streets, narrow and twisted, smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear, yet the people moved with a purpose, every step measured, every glance sharpened by necessity. Conrad of Montferrat walked the ramparts at dawn, his cloak torn and dust-laden, his sword at his side more for ceremony than for battle. From above, he could see the vast expanse of Saladin's camp, dotted with tents, smoke, and banners that rippled like green fire in the wind. The Mamluks, trained killers mounted on horses bred for war, were already advancing toward the city. Siege towers creaked ominously as teams of engineers shoved them across the plain, while mangonels hurled massive stones that slammed into the walls with bone-rattling force. "God help us," murmured a young Templar, his hands tight on his bowstring. "There are too many of them." Conrad did not flinch. "Then let us show them how dangerous a few can be when hope is our shield." The first full assault began before the sun reached its zenith. Saladin's engineers had dragged a towering siege engine into position, a monstrous structure of wood and iron, taller than any wall it faced. Flames flickered across its joints, as if the machine itself were alive, hungry for the destruction it promised. The defenders unleashed everything they had. Boiling oil poured from the battlements. Stones and firebrands were flung down upon the advancing soldiers. Arrows filled the air, singing death to those below. Still, the siege towers pressed forward, slowly but relentlessly. From the harbour, Geno's galleys swept out to strike at the Sultan's ships. Their crews rowed with every ounce of strength, ramming vessels laden with supplies and men into one another. Explosions of fire and splintered would lit the sea as flaming projectiles rained down, turning the waves into a burning battlefield. The roar of the defenders rose in response, shouts, prayers, and cries of defiance mingling with the shriek of the wind. Inside the city, the streets were alive with movement. Citizens carried water to douse fires, young boys passed arrows to archers on the walls, and women braced stones for the ramparts, their hands blistered but unyielding. The priests moved among them, blessing the defenders, urging them to courage, and reminding them that their fight was not just for survival, but for the soul of the kingdom. In the midst of this chaos, Conrad moved with calm precision. Every order he gave was measured, every decision made with the mind of a general who knew the weight of life and death rested upon his shoulders. He dispatched small detachments to harass the siege lines, sent archers to higher towers to pick off enemy engineers, and coordinated the timing of the galleys' attacks with the raising of the city's defenses. The day wore on, and still the walls stood. Tyre's defenders were relentless. Every breach the enemy attempted was repelled, every siege tower set ablaze before it could reach the stone. For the first time, whispers traveled through the ranks of Saladin's army. This city might not be so easily conquered. But the Sultan was patient. He knew that Tyre would eventually succumb, not through force alone, but through attrition. He tightened his blockade, cutting off supplies from the mainland, and ordered his engineers to construct larger and more formidable mangonels. The nights were long and sleepless for the defenders. They listened to the distant calls of the Mamluks, the rumble of siege engines, and the crackle of torches along the walls. Each night, they prepared for renewed assault at dawn. Yet the city was not without moments of hope. One morning, a courier arrived from the fleet of Venice. Word had spread that reinforcements and supplies would reach the harbor within days. Conrad knew that time was both ally and enemy. Each day the defenders held out broad aid, but every day also tested their endurance. In the alleys of Tyre, a young boy carried water to a wounded knight. The man looked up, his face streaked with blood, eyes burning with defiance. "We will hold," he said, almost to himself. "As long as walls and hearts endure, we will hold." That night, a new challenge arose. Saladin sent his engineers to build a floating platform, a sort of mobile siege tower on the water, designed to breach the city's harbor defenses. Conrad and the city council convened in the main hall, tracing the waters on a map, debating every possible countermeasure. The Genoese fleet would have to strike before the platform reached the walls, and archers were to concentrate fire on every vulnerable plank. As the first moon rose, the floating siege tower appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the silver sea. Flames were tied to the ropes that would hold the sails. Conrad signaled the fleet, and the galleys surged forward. Rocks, arrows, and fire rained upon the vessel. It lurched, caught fire, and drifted helplessly, turning the sea itself into a battlefield. By dawn, the remains had washed ashore, a charred testament to the ingenuity and courage of the city's defenders. For a moment, Tyre breathed, but the siege was far from over. Saladin would not rest. Each day brought renewed assaults, each night a deeper sense of dread. Still, the city's spirit held firm. Men and women fought with a determination born of desperation. Their leaders, though weary, inspired them to acts of heroism that would echo through the ages. The siege of Tyre was no longer merely a military campaign. It had become a test of faith, courage, and endurance. Every stone thrown, every arrow loosed, every ship burned was a statement that even in the face of overwhelming force, human will could resist. Conrad walked the walls again, observing the dawn. The city below stirred, preparing for another day of defense. He saw the fear in the eyes of some, the exhaustion in the bodies of others, and yet, above it all, the resolve remained. He tightened his grip on his sword and whispered to the rising sun, "Hold fast, for today we fight not just for life, but for legend." And so the siege pressed on. Day after day, the forces of Saladin battered the walls, testing every weakness, while the defenders, inspired by their leaders, met each assault with ingenuity, ferocity, and faith. Tyre had become a crucible, and in its stone and blood, the spirit of the Crusader Kingdom was forged anew. The storm of war raged on, unrelenting, and Tyre, battered, blooded, but unbroken, prepared to face whatever fury the Sultan could muster. The city was alive with defiance, and its people had made a vow that Tyre would not fall while one stone remained standing, one archer remained at his post, one soul remained willing to fight. History was watching, and in the struggle of men, of hope against despair, Tyre's legend was being written, in fire, in blood, and in the unyielding courage of those who refused to surrender. The siege of Tyre had stretched into weeks, and yet the city remained unbroken. Every sunrise brought a renewed wave of arrows, boulders, and fire. Every night carried the cries of the wounded and the fearful whispers of the city's inhabitants. Saladin's patience was inexhaustible, but so too was the resolve of Tyre. The city had become more than stone and mortar. It was now a symbol, a beacon of resistance, a testament to what human courage could achieve when backed by faith. Conrad of Montferrat had walked the walls countless times, observing the enemy, calculating their every movement, predicting their next strike. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. He saw the exhaustion in his men, but he also saw their unwavering determination. Their fear was present, but it was tempered by the knowledge that retreat was not an option. Tyre was their last stand, their home, and the last flame of a dying kingdom. One morning, scouts returned with news. A division of Saladin's engineers was preparing to launch a massive assault on the northern walls, where the stone had been weakened by weeks of bombardment. Conrad summoned his captains immediately. The city council gathered in the shadow of the main gate, maps spread across a wooden table, hands tracing paths of attack and defense. "We will not wait for them to strike," Conrad said, his voice firm, unwavering. "We will meet them in the open where we have the advantage. The northern walls are vulnerable, but the ground before them is marshy. We know it better than they do. We will lure them in, and then we will strike." Plans were made swiftly. Archers were repositioned along the northern ramparts, boiling oil was prepared in cauldrons, and hidden pits were dug under the marshy soil to ensnare advancing siege towers. Conrad knew that the coming battle would decide the fate of the city. If Tyre fell, It would open the way for Saladin to consolidate his conquest of the coast. But if Tyre held, it would become a thorn in the Sultan's side, a rallying point for the remnants of the Crusader Kingdom. The attack came at dawn. Mist rolled over the plains, and the first of Saladin's siege towers creaked forward through the fog. His engineers guided them with ropes, their figures ghostly in the morning light. Behind them, thousands of soldiers pressed onward, their eyes fixed on the walls of Tyre. The air was tense, heavy with the anticipation of bloodshed. Conrad signaled the counterattack. A small contingent of knights rode out from the city, galloping toward the advancing towers. Their charge was sudden, like lightning striking in a clear sky. The Mamluks reeled back in surprise, but their numbers were overwhelming. The knights fell back behind the walls, leaving the towers ensnared in pits concealed beneath the marshy ground. Horses screamed, and men tumbled into the traps, dragged under by hidden stakes. From the ramparts, archers unleashed a torrent of arrows, striking engineers and soldiers alike. Boiling oil cascaded down the walls, searing flesh and armor. Fires ignited the siege towers, turning them into flaming behemoths that collapsed with terrifying force. The city roared with triumph, but Conrad knew better than to celebrate. This was only the beginning. Saladin watched from the plain, his gaze steady, calculating, unshaken. He had anticipated resistance, but Tyre had exceeded even his expectations. He called his commanders together, his voice calm but firm. "Strength alone will not take this city," he said. "We must break their spirit, and for that, we will strike where they least expect it." That night, Saladin attempted a new tactic. He sent a small contingent of elite warriors to scale the walls under cover of darkness. Their movement was silent, their shadows long in the moonlight. But the city's vigilance had not waned. Watchmen on the towers spotted the intruders, and the alarm rang out. Fires were lit along the ramparts, and archers loosed a deadly hail of arrows. The infiltrators fell back, many slain, their bodies scattered along the outer walls as a warning to the rest of the Sultan's forces. In Tyre, hope began to swell. The people whispered of miracles and divine favor. Priests walked the streets, blessing the walls, the defenders, and the wounded. Children were carried to safety, their eyes wide with the awe of witnessing courage beyond their understanding. For a moment, the city felt invincible. But Saladin was not deterred. He had faced defeat before, and patience was his greatest weapon. Days turned into weeks, and he continued to bombard the city with artillery and arrows, probing for weaknesses, testing every gate and tower. Each assault was met with fierce resistance. Men and women fought side by side, their unity forged in the crucible of survival. Every day, the defenders' courage grew, tempered by fire and sharpened by the knowledge that their city might be the last bastion of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. Then came the naval battle that would etch itself into legend. Saladin's fleet, assembled from Egyptian and Syrian ships, advanced along the coast to blockade the harbor. Conrad had anticipated this and prepared a trap. The Genoese fleet, smaller but faster and more maneuverable, lay in wait. As the Sultan's ships entered the narrow channel, the defenders struck. Flaming projectiles rained down from the walls. Archers on the galleys fired volley after volley, cutting down sailors and soldiers alike. The narrow waters became a maelstrom of fire, smoke, and shattered wood. Ships collided, burned, and sank, leaving the Sultan's forces in disarray. The waters themselves seemed to fight for the city, carrying the remnants of the enemy back toward the open sea. Amidst the chaos, Conrad led a sortie to strike at the enemy's encampment. A small force of knights and archers slipped out through a secret passage known only to the city's defenders. They descended upon Saladin's engineers, destroying siege engines and scattering supplies. Fires erupted across the plain, and the Sultan's forces were thrown into confusion. The city cheered, but Conrad knew the victory was temporary. The Sultan would rebuild, reinforce, and return with greater determination. Inside Tyre, the people celebrated, but not for long. Every day of survival was a battle, and exhaustion weighed heavily upon the defenders. Soldiers were wounded, supplies dwindled, and morale was tested by the constant threat of death. Yet, in the face of despair, leadership and faith held firm. Conrad moved among his men, offering encouragement, sharing food, and inspiring acts of heroism that would be remembered for generations. It was during these days that the character of Tyre was truly revealed. Not in the walls, the gates, or the cannons, but in the hearts of those who refused to yield. Fishermen became warriors, priests became strategists, and every citizen understood that their survival was inseparable from the survival of the city. Weeks passed, and the battle waged on. Tyre had become a living symbol, a city of defiance that neither Saladin's armies nor his cunning could conquer. Each assault, each siege engine, each arrow loosed from the Sultan's ranks was met with equal courage, and often with unexpected ingenuity. Traps, counterattacks, and the ever-watchful eye of Conrad kept the defenders one step ahead. Finally, the Sultan realized that brute force alone would not take the city. He had faced storms, fire, and human courage that refused to break. Patience, which had carried him through Hattin and Jerusalem, was no longer enough. Tyre had turned the tide, not through numbers or power, but through unity, strategy, and unwavering determination. As the sun set on another day of battle, the city stood firm, battered but unbroken. The walls bore the scars of countless assaults, the streets were lined with the exhausted and wounded, yet the spirit of Tyre remained indomitable. Conrad walked the ramparts one final time that evening, looking out over the harbour, the sea, and the distant fires of the enemy camp. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we fight again, but they will know the price of defying Tyre." The city had survived, and the legend of its defense was growing. What had begun as a desperate stand had become a story of courage that would echo far beyond the walls of stone and blood. Tyre was no longer merely a city. It was a symbol, a promise, and a warning. Saladin's army remained formidable, relentless, and determined, yet Tyre had turned the tide. The battle had shifted, not by the strength of arms alone, but by the spirit, the ingenuity, and the unyielding will of those who refused to surrender. And as night fell over the city, Tyre's banners fluttered in the cool wind, and the people slept, if only briefly, knowing that they had endured, that they had fought, and that the walls they defended had become immortal. The dawn broke over Tyre, and the city stirred like a living, breathing monument to defiance. Weeks of siege had left scars upon its walls, and yet they stood, battered but unbroken. The streets, lined with the exhausted, the wounded, and the brave, held a tense silence, the calm before what all feared would be the final storm. From the distant plains, Saladin's army advanced once more, the clatter of armor and the rolling of siege towers echoing across the fields. His eyes, usually calm and commanding, flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. Tyre had endured everything he could muster. Fire, steel, and relentless assault had been met with ingenuity, courage, and faith that would not falter. Conrad of Montferrat stood upon the ramparts, surveying the enemy. His face was streaked with ash and sweat, his armor dented, but his eyes blazed with resolve. He raised his hand to the city below, not in command, but in solidarity. Every citizen, every knight, every priest and fisherman had become part of something greater than themselves, a living wall of defiance. The final assault began at mid-morning. Siege towers creaked forward, mangonels hurled massive stones, and the Sultan's forces pressed upon the northern walls. But Tyre's defenders had anticipated this. Traps, counterattacks, and well-aimed volleys turned the plain into a battlefield of chaos. Flames consumed siege engines, arrows found their marks, and the enemy faltered, disordered by the ferocity of a city that refused to die. Saladin watched, his patience strained. He had conquered Jerusalem, crushed armies at Hattin, and yet Tyre, a single city on the sea, had withstood him. He knew then that no force, however great, could break a people united in purpose and spirit. With a calculated withdrawal, he ordered his army back to the plains, leaving Tyre untouched, for now. The city erupted in celebration. Bells rang from every tower. People wept with relief, kneeling in thanks for their survival. Conrad walked among them, humble in victory yet aware of the cost. Countless lives had been lost, countless wounds suffered, yet Tyre had endured. It was more than a city now. It was a legend, a beacon for all who would resist. From the ramparts, Conrad gazed across the sea, where the sun glimmered on calm waters. "We have survived," he murmured. "Not because we are stronger, but because we refuse to surrender. Let this be our legacy, that Tyre stands unbroken, and that courage can outlast even the greatest storm." And so the siege ended, not with the fall of walls, but with the triumph of spirit. Tyre remained a citadel of hope, a testament to the unyielding courage of those who defended it. The Sultan would return to his conquests, but the legend of Tyre, of fire, blood, and undying will, would echo through history forever.